Hello everybody, my name is Meteor Kaiser and welcome back to another challenge video. One of the more popular things I've done on my channel has been my Earthbound as Only Nest challenge. So I'm like, you know what, love Earthbound, but I didn't want to do another Earthbound challenge. So we're going to go into the next best option and my second favorite in the series, Mother 3. It's kind of funny because Lucas is in Smash, but the only way to know about his character is to play a game that was never released in America. So I'm like, why did they never release it? But anyway, I won't go into that. Today we're going to be playing the fan translation patch of this, because that's the only easy way to play it because there's no official English release. And actually to do this challenge, we have to use the fan patch. The reason is because the translation team for this added a cool little Easter egg where if you enter your name as hard mode in the first chapter, the game will become a harder version of its regular difficulty. The main thing to notice about this hard mode is that all enemies' HP totals are doubled. So that means fights are just going to be a little bit more dragged on, a little bit harder for us to deal with. And there's a little bit of stat boosts here and there, but nothing too major on the stat boost sides of things. It's more of HP thing that's going to be really a pain in the ass for us to deal with. With those simple little things over and done with, that's the only rule that I've got, is just I'm beating this doing hard mode. So can you beat Mother 3 in hard mode? This is obviously going to be very spoiler filled, so if you don't want to be spoiled for a 15-year-old game at this point, feel free to turn off. But if you don't mind that, feel free to stick along for the ride. And if you haven't done so already, it'd be greatly appreciated if you could hit that subscribe button and support my channel. In order for me to continue doing this on a consistent basis, having a bit more support will help and will go quite the long way. So if you haven't subbed already, please go ahead and hit that sub button. Thank you so much. So the game opens up with us as Lucas, the main character. The thing is, this game's a little bit different than Earthbound, is that in each chapter, from chapters 1 to chapter 3, you're going to have a different main character, and the game is split up into chapters 1 through 8. But we'll cross each chapter when we get to it type thing. So the game opens up with us as Lucas in the Nowhere Islands, specifically in the little village of Tasmili, and more specifically in the north of that area in our grandfather Alex's house. This little prologue just shows us how to play the game. Essentially, we can dash with the B button, which is a big improvement from Earthbound, and also gives us an intro into the battle system. The battle system is very similar to the one in Earthbound, except there's a little bit of a musical side of things. When you bash, if you hit the A button in tune with the music, but like there's a certain heartbeat that each music has. I don't know each specific ones, but there's a thing online that you can look up for that. But you basically just hit the A button in certain successions and you're going to be able to do more hits on the enemy. You can get up to a max of 16, I believe, but I've only ever hit like 12 because I'm awful at it. It's not necessary for you to use the music system, but it's going to be damage that'll help you out. After defeating the mole cricket, who we learn this sort of new battle system based on, we switch over to the actual first part of the game, Chapter 1, Night of the Funeral. Chapter 1 opens up with the forest being lit on fire by what is presumably these pig-shaped masked guys who are known as the Pig Mask Army, but I don't think we actually know that yet. Our first character that we take control of is Flint, who is Lucas and Klaus's father and Hinawa's husband. Hinawa and Klaus are also part of the family, the other brother of Lucas and the wife. I don't think Flint is necessarily a firefighter, but he's just kind of a badass. So the townspeople are relying on him to go figure out what the hell's going on and save any people that have been trapped in the forest fire. Before we actually jump into the forest, we go around town, sort of see everything. There's nothing too important here. One thing to mention is this man named Mapson who will locate where we need to go on our map, which is accessible by pressing L or R. This is a GBA game, by the way, so... And I'm obviously, since it's a fan patch, I'm playing this on an emulator. So I do use super speed every now and then. But super speeding battles, not a good idea, because you won't be able to get any of those combos off unless you got super fast fingers. Anyway, we locate this little sanctuary at the beginning, which we are able to input the player's name. Now that is our name. So in order to activate hard mode, you need to put hard space mode in all caps as the name, and that'll increase every enemy's HP by 2 times. we deal with our first little enemies, Mr. Baddies, which are a lot harder than they normally should be because double HP early on kind of sucks. However, our system of healing in this game are hot springs. And there is a hot spring located right next to us, so we're gonna use that and abuse that quite a lot throughout this game. The other thing that's kind of cool to mention is in this game, if you die, all of your items that you used in the fight will get destroyed, like because you've already used them up. However, if you don't use any items and you die, you just go back to where you were last with all of your experience intact. So honestly, dying is a very viable strategy that I use a lot. We make our way through the forest defeating monster yams, some fireflies, and other such monsters until we are able to reach a cabin which the child named Fuel, I know, what a name for a kid, is located in. So we go ahead and save him from the burning building, bring him back to his father Lighter, who's gotten injured, and we take a rest in the hotel. We realize that the following day, so we get a carrier pigeon message from Flint's wife, and we're like, has anybody seen them? But no one's seen where Hinawa and the lot were. Flint panics and goes into the forest. He brings his dog Boney along with him, and Boney is surprisingly enough, he's a main character. Boney is a very important unit. He's not very strong, but he is very, very good for utility. He's basically going to be our item guy. After we make our way through the forest enough, we come past an impassable area. However, with the introduction of the next character, Duster, he comes over and uses his Fief arts, as it's called. He has 7 Fief tools that he can use, and the first of which is wall staples. And wall staples will literally make a ladder on ground that can be climbed. Duster also decides to join us on our search for Hinawa up into the mountains, and as that's the case, we are able to run into our first boss fight of the chapter, the Reconstructed Caribou. Now, by default, the Reconstructed Caribou has 512 HP. However, he's probably going to have around 1,000 because ours is hard mode. One thing I did not take advantage of was Flint's has certain special abilities under the brute force section, and I completely forgot about this because I haven't played this game in forever. But he can basically do more damage per attack rather than just like hitting them normally. It's a good idea for Duster to open up with wall staples on this boss, and he gets pretty weak to wall staples in general. His other vulnerabilities are PK Flash, which you don't really have access to at this point, and a Thunder Bomb. So if you have a Thunder Bomb, feel free to use that on this guy. The things that the Caribou can do is it's a 2-turn attack. It lets off a burst of steam and will go berserk on the next turn, and it'll deal a pretty high amount of damage. It can also charge and stab with its horn, and it may waste turns kicking the ground. The fight does give me a lot of problems, and Flint and Boney survive with only 5 HP left, and Duster dies. That's a tell for the rest of the game for sure. After defeating the Caribou, we head back down and try and go to that other pathway that was blocked off before, and it turns out that the other village people have found both of Klaus and Lucas, so they are safe and sound, which is good. However, Bronson comes by and lets us know that he has some good news and some bad news. The good news is he has found a Draco Fang, which is going to be very, very, very useful for later on. The bad news is, and spoiler alert, this is a big spoiler alert, well, it's not terrible, but yeah, he found it inside of his wife's stomach, impaled into Hinawa. Flint goes berserk knowing this, attacking the other town members and just going insane. He gets thrown into the jail, which has been never used before. After breaking out of the jail, we head up to Hinawa's grave, which Lucas is sobbing at, and Klaus is nowhere to be seen. Both Alec and Flint then decide we gotta take this Draco down if it's a bad Draco, because Dragos are supposed to be passive creatures, but if it was a Drago that ended up killing Hinawa, then something's got to be done about it, and the Draco Fang is what we'll use. So we head up north to Alec's house, and we get a lot of training done along the way. Once we meet up with Alec, we head over to an area to the right of Alec's house called the Magypsies area. And the Magypsies are this ancient group of people who have been living on these islands for 10,000 years at least. But we actually learn that the leader of the Magypsies, Aeolia, has taught Klaus PSI, And it looks like Klaus is trying to get revenge for Hinawa himself. And now that we've learned that, we're also like, okay, we're going to kill the Draco and save our son. So we make our way to the cave behind the Magypsy's house, which is specifically Aeolia's house. But all the other Magypsies are there, except for one. There's supposed to be 7, and 1 is missing. But that's not important until later. Heading behind the area, we run into a lot more enemies, some birds, some sand pincer weird things. We run across more pigmen, some trees that explode, a whole bunch of stuff. Until we eventually reach the end area where we fight against the final boss of Chapter 1, the Mecha Draco. And this guy gives me some problems for sure. I do die on the first attempt, and then I realize, oh, I should probably grind a bit more. Having Alec in our party is pretty nice because Alec does give us healing every now and then, but he's still not the best party member. So turn 1 for the Mecha Draco. What you have to do is you have to use that Dragon Fang, or the Draco Fang. Draco Fang. I keep saying Draco. It's Draco Fang, in order to pierce his defense. Because if you don't do that, he's gonna only take 1 damage from you regardless of what you do. So the Mecha Draco will bite and stomp Flint for moderate and high damage. So yikes. Respectively, of course. It can shoot flames and bellow a war cry. The war cry is probably the worst because it'll reduce your stats. And having your stats reduced just makes the fight last longer. But it has default HP of 724. And of course you double that and you've got essentially 1400. So it takes us a quick minute. Thank God he doesn't do a terrible amount of damage. And we finally learned, oh, we can use our brute force skills to gather strength and defense. And I have enough items that should hopefully last me through the fight. And they do. It'll perform a final attack when it's getting defeated. And that's actually how I lost the first time, which was kind of sad. But you gotta mash through the text as quickly as possible when you defeat him. And with that, we have defeated the Mecha Draco and completed Chapter 1 of the game. Flint goes to kill the Draco, but its baby stops it from killing it. And then we're like, yeah, let's not murder everything. And the chapter ends extremely ominously, with it panning off to the right, and all we see is Klaus's lifeless corpse over the cliff. Well, we assume to be lifeless. So the only 2 that we know of are Lucas and Flint. Everyone else is either MIA or dead. After that, we move on to Chapter 2, Fief Adventure, which is, in my opinion, the hardest chapter in the game. After taking control of Flint for the first chapter, our second chapter main protagonist is Duster himself, in which we are tasked with, after the whole events of Chapter 1, finding something shiny to bring back from Oso Castle, which is in the far north of Tazmily. We make sure to go underground and pick up all of our Fief tools. We have the wall staples, which will pin down an enemy, basically making it numb. The Siren Beetle, which will turn around an enemy. The Smoke Bomb, which will make an enemy cry, which means they'll miss more. Hypno Pendulum will put someone to sleep. The 2 most important ones, Scary Mask, which will lower attack, and Tickle Stick, which will lower defense. As we're heading north, though, we run across a small little monkey and some weird looking guy. And the only reason I mention that is because that's important for later. We also see someone who has been introduced to money for the first time, because the concept of money does not exist in Tazmily. Everything is based on a bartering system, so before currency was introduced, so very archaic in that sense. As we're heading north, we see an ominous ship over above, which the player can make the assumption that it's the Pig Mask army again. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but like, first enemy that we fight against are zombies, right? As we're passing through the graveyard to get to the castle, they give us the most problem I have dealt with so far. There's a lot of them, they do a lot of damage, so I decide to grind against level or chapter 1 enemies for a little bit until I feel comfortable with dealing with the rest of these guys. We head to an underground section in which we defeat leeches and lobsters. They're not terrible, but they are a little annoying. We make our way into the castle, and oh god, these enemies are just the worst, okay? There's ghosts that'll make you cough uncontrollably. make you feel sick. So nausea in this game is similar to catching a cold in Earthbound. So we'll lose up to 20 HP each turn just from coughing up our lungs. It's awful. Fresh mints will fix that, and that's what we can get from some of these guys we trade for Rotten Eclairs. But nah, they give me a lot of problems. The easiest enemy to deal with are actually just the arachnids. They are quite not too bad. There's also the little bro who don't do anything in the basement. And we didn't actually need to go to the basement. This area is pretty big. We've also got suits of armor, which are a pain in the ass because they've got insanely high defense. They wreck our world, and there's also roaches to deal with. So this chapter's just got a lot of weird enemies. There is a mini boss in the form of the Ghost Knight, but I don't even bother trying to take him down because holy shit. When we're about, I want to say halfway through the castle, we run across our first boss of the chapter, Mr. Passion, who is a conductor, musical conductor. He's got 630 HP, and of course he'll have over 1,000 in R mode. Mr. Passion can throw candles, make a chair charge, brandish his baton, and he can even throw a mouse at us. There's a chance he can get lost in music, which makes him lose a turn, which is nice. Once he takes about half his HP, he becomes a little bit more exuberant. He'll occasionally now start sending everything but the kitchen sink flying, so it's just a lot of attacks. His weakness is crying, so using smoke bombs is very nice. So make sure you always open with that smoke bomb. However, I just think we're not high enough leveled. So what I end up doing is there's a save frog right next to us, and I haven't mentioned this, but the things that make you save your game in this game are frogs instead of your father. So I just grind endlessly for a little while until I feel comfortable enough going back into the fight. And the second time around, things go a little bit easier, which is thank God. So we receive a spittoon, and we think this is the item, right? So we head back over to Wes's house, our grandfather, and he's like, no, you idiot, that's not it. So Wes actually comes with us this time around. But when we go back to the castle, the pigman army, a bunch of pigmen and then a pigman captain, stroll in and are like, hey, we're gonna take over this place. So once we re-enter, we have to fight against our second boss of the chapter, the Clayman. Now, unlike Mr. Passion himself, this boss is a complete and utter joke. So Clayman has 879 HP, so that brings our total up to 1700. Now that we have Wes on board, Wes has a few abilities where he can either use a bomb, he can use his Fief arts, he can either attack, or he can do nothing. The Clayman can pretty much either bum rush, or throw a punch, or crush with all its weight. Crush with all its weight will do a lot of damage to us, but it'll fall over for a couple of turns. The crush with all its weight does about 40 to us, and that's not awful. So we have enough time to go into our inventory and pop a couple of beef jerkies. It's also vulnerable to sleep, which is pretty nice to mention. But once we take care of that guy, the rest of the castle opens up to us again. And now instead of ghosts being our enemies, we have to deal with pigmen. Pigmen are actually pretty annoying to deal with, not gonna lie. So once we make our way back to where Mr. Passion was at, it turns out that there is a door there that we had to open, and we come across what I believe is the best part of the game, which is Wes dancing. So I might just let you see this for a sec. Beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. After opening up that little cave area, we see that there's a weird looking needle in the distance. We'll deal with that later. Again, there's a lot of references to other chapters here. As we're heading on upwards through the castle, we run into this girl who has been injured, but it turns out that this is the princess of the castle who goes by the name of Kumitori. And so you know, you can change the names or whatever you want for any of these characters. However, I go defaults this time because it's just easier. But Kumitori is our by default attack PSI girl. She's more than Ness or Ninten, because Lucas is like the Paula or Anna. Because Lucas is our healer, not Kumitori. Kumitori is the attacker. So Kumitori has PSI. We're gonna go by PSI or PK. It's the same thing. She just starts off with PSI Freeze Alpha and PSI Fire Alpha. A lot of these starting enemies that we run across are the Lingering Spirits, which are taken down by a couple of freezes, which is nice. run across a couple of more annoying enemies, but we keep going upwards, defeating more and more things, getting Kumitori some levels that she definitely needs, until we reach the very, very tip top of this area, in which we run across this winged egg thing that's supposedly the treasure, and that's also what the pigmen are here for. Once we decide, oh crap, they're here, there's a bunch of Clayman outside, pigmen and all that, so we pick up the treasure, but immediately get dropped into the basement. And once we're in the basement, we actually have to deal with our final boss of chapter 2, the Oso Snake. The Oso Snake is going to be a little bit more annoying to deal with, but it isn't. It's actually, Mr. Passion's definitely the worst boss for this fight, for this chapter, by far. So the Oso Snake has 1,237 HP, so doubling that, kind of insane. So it can slap both of us with its tail, use a biting attack on a single party member, and it can coil around a party member, solidifying them. Later on, it will dive into the water and then cause a large wave, and it will splash on both party members. However, after that, it'll be down for a couple of turns until it rises back out of the water, and it can also waste turns by just making bubbles. So the strategy is like the strategy for every boss fight in this game. It's just lower its attack, lower its defense, heal when needed, and for this one, its weakness is PK Thunder. So using PK Thunder, and it's also weak to crying, so try and hit them with that smoke bomb if you can remember to. Making it miss its attacks is a lot better, and hopefully it hits Duster more than it does anything else. But just keep bashing away, and it'll eventually go down, and we beat chapter 2. Next up, we move on to chapter 3, the Suspicious Peddler, which opens up with one of those pig mask ships, in which a bunch of pig masks and then this weird looking man named Facade comes out with a monkey, who is our actual controlled character of this chapter, Salsa. Now Salsa is basically trying to protect his monkey girlfriend, and by doing that, he's doing whatever Facade wants him to do as bidding. So Facade has a habit of abusing this guy, electrocution, berating. Yeah, this game is really bad. Like, it's good, but you know, it's like really kind of evil in a sense. There's just a lot of fucked up things going on. We start off with another super low leveled character, and basically our strategy for like the first half of this area is just to defend. Literally, you do no damage, so just let Facade do all the damage. Facade is your party member. He can bum rush, he can attack. He does a lot of damage compared to us, so it's definitely worth just letting Facade do everything. Even against the first boss that we run across, the Cactus Wolf, just letting Facade do everything works. With our mod, this guy has 900 HP. He has 468 by default. And basically, the strategy for the boss fight is to just defend. Because if you don't defend, he'll do like upwards of like 10 to 20 damage per attack. And that's a lot at this stage, because you're level 1 again. Letting Facade deal with everything works. After clearing out the Cactus Wolf, we make our way into that area, and it turns out that that is a facility for pigmen to reach Tazmily Village. So you ride across the pork bean thing and make your way to Tazmily. Now your job in Tazmily, along with Facade, is to introduce happiness to the villagers. What Facade means by this is he's basically introducing money, he's introducing capitalism, he's trying to change them from their regular lives into something more highbrow and sophisticated. Basically corrupting the villagers with capitalism. Yay! This game is way too real. But we have to go around delivering some happiness boxes to people. And then when we're done with that, we're tasked with going to Osoe Castle to try to figure out where Duster and all of them went to. Because we're like, oh, they took the egg, so we gotta go deal with them. We ended up flushing them out of the basement, because this happens right after chapter 2 is completed. And once we flush them out of the basement, our job is to find out where they went to. But when we go back to Tazmily, Facade and Salsa run into Kumitori and Wes, but Duster is nowhere to be found, and Duster's the one with the egg. In the middle of the night, though, Kumitori basically figures out what's going on, that we're being forced to work by Facade, and Kumitori and Wes save us from Facade, destroying the electrocution chip thing, and we make our way into the forest. However, when we're like halfway through the forest and we try to come back, we run into the worst boss fight so far. the pork tank. The problem with this fight is not necessarily how difficult it is, but how much HP this damn thing has. The pork tank has 1,782 HP. We have 2 guys and not that much damage comparatively. And considering the HP is doubled to about 3,400, that's insane. There are 2 phases to the fight, and thank God the second phase is literally a joke. So the first phase, the tank can fire its cannon, charge forward, and run over the party. It'll also discharge exhaust fumes that can make us cry. So it's vulnerable to PK Thunder and Monkey Mimic. I haven't gone over this, but Salsa's special abilities, there's certain monkey things he can do, like apologize, dance, and then the most important one, which is Monkey Mimic, which is essentially like Mimic from Pokemon if you think of it that way. So you're not able to do any damage, but you do whatever they do to you. So for example, if the pork tank fires a cannonball at Salsa, then Salsa will fire the cannon back. Another thing Salsa should be doing is dancing, because it could have a chance to raise stats or lower stats for the enemy. So make sure you use that a little bit, because that'll help. The thing is, I just needed a grind. I just needed to get stronger. I got a lot stronger. I basically had to bash and not use too much of PK Thunder, even though PK Thunder is its weakness, because I needed to use that for life up. After having barely any HP or PP left over, I think we reached the second phase of the fight, which is super easy for the pork tank. The tank itself sort of stops firing its cannon because it explodes on itself. It reveals the pig mask inside of the tank. In this phase, it'll attempt to fire its cannon, but the cannon won't work anymore. The worst it'll do will be throwing some actual bombs at you, which thank God I have just enough PP and healing items to make do with. If you're low on healing items, it's important to go and fight against there's a few robots before you meet the pork tank. They have bags of pork chips. Just the regular old pig mask enemies, they have bags of pork chips, which will heal 50 HP. So if you're running low on HP, it's a good idea to grind against those guys to grab some HP healing items. Anyway, with barely any HP or PP remaining, we are able to take care of the pork tank. And this is easily the hardest boss fight of the game, I think. Specifically for how long it took me to deal with. That Mr. Passion was pretty bad, but this was really bad. So don't go into this in the same way I did. Make sure that you're leveling up beforehand rather than have to do like a power grind towards the end. However, it's a good thing I have that super speed button because the grinding didn't take me too long. Facade and his men come up and attempt to defeat us, but out of nowhere comes Lucas with the Dracos from the first chapter and save us. So Lucas is no longer the crybaby he used to be. He's grown up a little bit. After saving everyone from Facade, the game decides to time skip. Everyone goes off on their own separate path for a little while we try and find Duster. Now we move on to Chapter 4, Club Titty Boo. And yes, that's its name, or Titty Boo, but I'm gonna call it Titty Boo for obvious reasons. A Lamal. Anyway, so we have had a time skip, as I mentioned earlier. Now 3 years have passed. We are grown up as Lucas, and everyone has sort of gone their own separate ways. Duster is still MIA, and the town of Tazmily has completely been changed by Facade and the Pigmen. It is modernizing slowly. We've got shops, we've got trains, we've even got a factory. We've got a lot of stuff, and they've also introduced a new system into the game called DP. It stands for Dragon Points, which is the money system of this game. You can store or deposit DP at a frog, and DP is used to buy items, equipment, various other stuff. So we awaken as Lucas, and we explore this new area of Tazmily. Eventually, once you explore to the north part of the railroad tracks, a couple of the townsfolk, Bronson and Jackie, come off the train and say that there was a person that kind of looked like Duster at Club Titty Boo. We can't get on the train, so we have to go around and look at other places. We tell Wes, who is currently right now in a retirement home, as funny as that sounds, that there's someone that looks like Duster at Club Titty Boo. Wes tasks us with going to check to see if this is true or not. If we go back up to where that train station was, we actually can't use the train itself, but we can use the train tracks, and that's how we're gonna have to get to the next area. So there's plenty of enemies along the path, including our very, very favorite Ramblin' Mushroom from the first game. Don't worry this time, the rambling mushroom's not nearly as bad. Make sure that before you leave though, to get a few healing items from the bakery, because it's gonna be a little annoying to deal with stuff, considering Lucas does not have access to PSI quite yet. However, talking about that, as we reach about halfway through the train track, I actually run across a bunch of magic butterflies that we could see a lot of in the first game. And by first game, I mean Earthbound. And if we head up north, up top, there's a little hot spring with one of the Magipsies in Ionia. Now, Ionia decides to teach us how to use our PSI skills, kind of like how Aeolia did with Klaus. Ionia goes ahead and teaches us Life Up Alpha, Healing Alpha, and PK Love Alpha. This will be named after your favorite thing. And Earthbound, I named it Vibing. This one I decided to go with the classic Love, just because I wanted everything to be nice and vanilla here. Now that we have PSI, it's beautiful because we can actually heal our party members. We can heal ourselves and Boney as much as we need to. Keep following the train tracks to the east, and eventually you'll reach the factory. Now this is a Clayman factory where they make Claymans, those weird guys that we fought in the second part. Apparently, in order to get into Club Titty Boo, we have to have a ticket, and the only way to get a ticket is to work at the factory. So one of the pig masks mistakes us with a part-timer, but that's actually good for us. So he gives us a job, which we have to move a bunch of exhausted Claymen from the bottom to the top to get recycled. After we do that 3 times, he gives us 200 DP, and he'll give us a ticket for the ropeway, which takes us to Club Titty Boo. This is hilarious to me. So there'll be a couple of bouncers blocking the door for Club Titty Boo. Skinhead and Neckbeard. I know, it's hilarious. The names are great in this. So they block us because they're like, no pets allowed. What Lucas and Boney decide to do is leave frame for a second, come back, and Boney's dressed up like a human now, and he's on his hind legs. It's hilarious. The only reason it lets us in is because the bouncers still don't get by it, but a pink-haired waitress steps out of the doors and vouches for us. We go inside and we learn that waitress named Violet is actually Kumitori, who's been undercover for the past few years. She tells us to go take a seat at the DCMC concert that's going on. To some people, I forgot to do this, by the way, so I'm not telling you guys to, but there is a person on the right that sells some DCMC stuff. Picking up the pamphlet will be very useful for next chapter. So we go in, we listen to the concert, and then after that we follow Kumitori into her room, which sounds weird, I know, but just don't worry about it. We take a shower in her room, which teaches us at the hot spring. They catch each other up on what's been happening. She lets us know what's been happening on her end, mainly. Figure out what the hummingbird egg, that egg of light that we saw before, is and where that is. And next we're tasked with going up into the attic in order to get into Duster's room. The attic is the only difficult part of this chapter. There's a lot of semi-annoying enemies here. There's also a mouse that sells items, so some things I would recommend you getting are an upgraded weapon for Lucas, and also some pencil rockets that you'll want to give to Boney. You'll need this later for the boss fight. A couple of the most annoying enemies that we have to deal with here are the arachnids, which will poison you. They're the upgraded version. Older baddies, which will suck your HP. Greedier mouse, which sometimes can steal your crap. Then there's a beaten drum and a gently weeping guitar, which just do a lot of damage. So just be careful with those guys. Anyway, as we get to the end of the attic, we run into the boss of this chapter, the Jealous Base. The base has 978 hit points, so that's double for us. It's weak to PK Fire, and that's pretty much it for the strategy for this. It comes with a drum and a guitar, which we want to make sure that we try and take out immediately. So Pencil Rockets and PK Love are your best options for this. When you knock out the other 2 guys that are with him, the base will fly into a rage. It'll increase its offense and have more attacks. So it'll have a series of multiple strikes that it can do. So this is just one of those fights where you have to be decently high leveled, which I grinded a bit. I won't lie, I did grind quite a bit. Enough pencil rockets to survive, and enough really PP that you can stall them out by using life up beta when you need to. After enough effort, we take out the base, jump into the room where the base was covering, which is where Duster is. We tell Duster who he is, but he's actually lost his memories. He's currently this man named Lucky. He has no clue what's going on. But the band decides to see what'll happen with him by doing rock, paper, scissors. We win every time, so Duster's gonna come along with us. And with that, that is the end of chapter 4 there. Now we move on to chapter 5, Tower of Thunder, which is the longest chapter that we've had to deal with so far, I would believe. And it's the first chapter that we have all of our party members together. We got Lucas, Duster, Kumitori, and Boney, who are going to be our final 4. And we have no other characters being introduced. So the game starts us off in a just cave area. And Duster has a few memories of where he left the Egg of Light. He actually stuffed it inside of a Clayman, a broken down Clayman. Now, there's something I didn't do, but I'll just mention this here for you guys, is you can backtrack to Oso Castle. And the reason you would want to do that is because you can refight against Lord Passion, or Mr. Passion, who's now Lord Passion. If you defeat him, you'll be able to get the mystical shoes for Duster. He's got 2,897 HP. He has the same moveset, but he's more powerful and can inflict several status changes. So just, I guess, same sort of thing as the last time, but just be more careful and weaken him essentially. Use those tickle feather thingies and the scary mask. But since I didn't do it, it's not too important for me and this playthrough. Basically, we're heading through the meadow outside of Club Titty Boo and we're going east instead through the Murasaki Forest. If we head east, we'll be at the base of the Thunder Tower. But the Thunder Tower area is pretty big, so we're not going to be able to get through this way. However, when we're at this factory area, they actually mistake us for someone else. They dress us up in this weird looking gear, and so all the pigmen think that we are the commander of the pigmen, which is kind of weird, except for one specific guy. Now, you remember that pork bean thing that we took from chapter 3? We're going to be driving around with that because this area is humongous. Now that Clayman that was missing, the one that we were trying to find, actually is up and moving, I guess. The Egg of Light sort of messed him up, and now he's in a truck. So we've got to follow him on said pork bean. But once we get about halfway through, we run into a guy called the Pork Trooper. He is going to be the first boss of chapter 5, and he was the first one to realize that, hey, we're not the commander, we are just Lucas. Now, this guy has 1,758 HP, and he is vulnerable to PK Fire, but he is more vulnerable to DCMC merchandise. That's what I meant by keeping hold of that DCMC pamphlet, because if you show it to him, he'll get mesmerized for a few turns, because he is a hardcore fan of the DCMC. So if you use this, I forgot about this DCMC thing myself, so don't worry. If you forget, it is possible to beat him without using that weakness. However, if you don't, you're going to have to deal with him bum rushing, swinging both arms for 2 targets, and using a powerful swing that does a decent amount of damage, and induces forgetfulness, which means you can't use special moves. And you can also jump on one target and pummel the shit out of them for multiple hits. So thankfully there's no like party wipe mechanics, so just make sure Lucas is using Life of Beta a lot, Kumitori is spamming fire, Duster is lowering his stats, and Boney's using any items that he has, and you'll eventually be able to deal with the Pork Trooper. So when he's defeated, we steal his pork bean, and we essentially keep going west. Make sure you're checking your map because you're going up and then right. Eventually you'll get to this little area that has the Clayman chilling in the bottom of a pit. So you go into the pit to try and retrieve the Egg of Light, but however you are attacked by the second boss of this chapter, the Forlorn Junk Heap. This is an amalgamation of a bunch of different parts added with a Clayman. Surprisingly, he has more HP than the Pork Trooper does, but he's not nearly as difficult to deal with. He has 1818 HP, so I'll have 3636. Jesus Christ. He starts the battle with a shield, and he can replenish it at will. He'll throw garbage at the party. He can either do really strong garbage or continuous, like multi-hit garbage throws. He can replenish HP, boost its defense, and induce nausea. He's weak to PK Fire, which is kind of funny how this one was easier for me than the Pork Trooper. The Pork Trooper just did more damage. But anyway, not too bad. We take care of him eventually, and we move on. We're at the Tower of Thunder now. We're at the Thunder Tower base now. Immediately when we go in, there is a instant revitalizing machine, which is very important to use. That'll full heal you. There's some equipment at the vending machine right to the left of the revitalizing machine. So pick up whatever new gear you need to get. The tower is long, but it's not necessarily hard. I wouldn't say any of the enemies are too bad. The most annoying guy has to be the miner robot. They just pack a hell of a punch. The battery men, however, are not that difficult to deal with. What's very, very important is to grab the DCMC fan book in the middle of the tower, because guess who you fight against for a second time? It's the pork trooper again. This time I have the DCMC item, so he is a joke compared to the last phase. Phase 2 really isn't that much worse than phase 1 for the pork trooper. He really doesn't have any new moves. He's also weak to DCMC merch again. He has an extra 300 HP, so 600 HP, and a bit more offense, defense, IQ and speed, all of that stuff. But you should be stronger as well, so I wouldn't worry too much about this. Just make sure you're using that DCMC merch, and then you should be able to continue. Once we get far enough in, we reach this really weird looking play area, I guess. There's a hot spring in the middle. There's also a robot on the left who is not an enemy unless you decide to make her an enemy. No, I'll tell you what that is in a sec. But you'll notice a lot of clues to the leader of the pig masks. If you look around this room and you can see anything, you might already realize who it is. However, I'm not going to say anything quite yet. So this robot is named Little Miss Marshmallow, and if you decide to touch that yo-yo that she's in front of, she's going to get pissed. So it is an optional boss fight, but it's one hell of an optional boss fight, and it gave me a lot of problems. I wouldn't say it was nearly as bad as the Pork Tank or Mr. Passion, but this one was pretty bad. It took me, I think, 2 or 3 attempts to defeat her. She has 2300 HP, and with hard mode, that's a lot higher, of course, as I've been reiterating over and over again. She's 2 phases. The first phase is a meeker phase, and the second phase is the oh shit, she's gonna destroy everything phase. And she's one of the first enemies that has an attack that can really hit everyone at once and do massive damage. But that's only in her second phase, though. In her first phase, she can attack 1 to 2 party members per turn. So with that information in mind, it's a good idea to make sure that you're raising your stats, lowering her stats in the first phase, using shields as much as you can, offense down, defense down alpha, and then the scary mask and the tickle stick, all of that stuff. Boney can just attack or heal or use the saltwater gun, which is good against robots. Once she becomes in her aggressive second form is when you want to make sure to take care of her like ASAP. So use whatever offensive moves you have in your arsenal. PK Love, PK Thunder, which is important because she's got a thunder weakness. And if you just keep at both of these, she'll eventually go down. Remember, there is a hot spring nearby, so you can grind in other areas if you need to. I'd actually recommend going up and fighting against the electric Zip Zap enemies. But before you do that, and if you've beaten the Little Miss Marshmallow, you can get that yo-yo, which you can equip if you want, but I'm not a fan of yo-yos. It's important to grab something from that vending machine that's to the left of her, or where she was, I guess. You want to grab 3 raincoats. This will be useful for the boss fight that we're gonna deal with at the end of the chapter. So very, very important to remember that. There's a few more enemies around. Try and avoid them if you can, because if you're high enough level, you shouldn't have to worry too much, and you don't want to waste all your PP going up. Once you reach the pinnacle of the tower, you'll be dealing with Mr. Janitor, who's the defense system of the Thunder Tower itself. Now, Mr. Janitor, he is a hell of an enemy. He has 3,333 HP, so that's by default, of course. He is a little bit annoying, right? So he's got a few attacks up his arsenal. First, it's just a Volt Chop, which will just deal damage to one enemy. There's also a couple of phases. He has a powered phase, which is, you'll notice by the sprite difference, he has like an electrical thingy in his left hand. He has a powered down phase, which will basically slump over. Literally the only thing I would recommend doing is guarding, besides from Kumitori, who can use PK Freeze, which is Mr. Janitor's weakness, because if you attack him on his powered up phase, he'll deal recoil damage to you, which will not be fun to deal with. And it nullifies rhythm combos, so that won't be fun either. After some time, he'll store electricity for 1 turn. Then he'll unleash a discharge zap attack thing, which does a lot of damage, electrical damage to the entire party. And when I mean a lot, I mean like 100 plus, which is insane for this point in the game. However, if you have those raincoats on, and this is where the big brain comes in, the raincoats will pretty much bring that damage to like 10, or like to about 20, I'd say, to about 20. Also, using flash on him will make him miss, so try and get him to start crying. So once he's used his little attack, he'll go into his powered down mode, which is when you want to start spam attacking, because there'll be no recoil or anything while you're attacking him at this point. He'll heal slightly each turn, but it's not enough to compensate for the damage that you're going to be taking or giving him. You rinse and repeat this strategy for a long enough time, and once you get him low enough, his charger will break, so he'll be permanently disabled and open to attack. So you just rinse and repeat this strategy until you run out of PP, and hope you don't run out of PP. If you do have any magic tarts or puddings or any of that stuff, PP healing items, I'd recommend using them on Lucas now. It would be a very good idea. The chapter ends with us going up the tower, Facade tripping on a banana that he ate and promptly dying, and then us escaping using the rope snake that we picked up earlier in the chapter onto a pig mask ship, and then we see this masked man at the end, which is pretty ominous and foreboding, but we'll get back into that later. And that is the end of chapter 5, and I'm going to leave chapter 6, 7, and 8 for the next half. So thank you guys. This is going to be the longer half, by the way, I think. Well, chapter 7 is insanely long, but whatever. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Mother 3 is a fantastic game with amazing writing. Sometimes it's pretty edgy and dark, but still it's a really good game. And hard mode is a fun challenge that isn't completely awful. So it's definitely something to give a shot. So far, it's been pretty hard, and I've had to do a lot of grinding. Thank God for super speeding, but it's still a fun challenge that makes me think. So thank you guys so much for watching. I've been Meteor Kaiser, and I'll see you on the next one. But until then, as always, peace.